It's 1983 in the sleepy town of Hawkins, Indiana. Arcade games, Dungeons and Dragons, and biking around town late at night with no supervision are the order of the day. But for a tight-knit group of friends named Will, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas, everything they took for granted is about to become really weird. You'd probably thought I'd say stranger, but I'm hard to predict. Kind of like what happens when the government plops a secret high-tech testing facility right next to your neighborhood and opens up a breach between our dimension and a twisted alternate dimension full of monsters. Welcome to the upside-down world of Stranger Things, the spooky adventure series that first went bananas on Netflix in 2016. The show is regularly praised for appealing to people who already saw and loved movies like Carrie, Stand By Me, E.T., Poltergeist, and Alien, while still offering a ton of solid acting and fresh thrills and chills. When Will Byers goes mysteriously missing at the top of season 1, it sets off a chain of events that will change Hawkins forever and threaten the fabric of reality itself. But of course, we would survive, and if all of you watch this epic-length How to Beat video, so will you, because today we're going through all of Stranger Things Season 1 and breaking down what happened, the mistakes that were made, and what you should do to beat a Demigorgon, an army of secret government agents, and anything else the Upside Down can throw at you. Hopefully, some Eggo waffles. Things in Stranger Things first go sideways one night at the Hawkins National Laboratory, a suspiciously vague name for a building that's definitely hiding government secrets. Unfortunately, one of those secrets just broke loose, and all hell is about to do the same. One of the scientists tries to escape down a corridor, but gets that classic horror kill where there's something unseen on the ceiling, and it just claw games you up. There are some creature noises, but we don't get a look at the monster, and the only blood spray is symbolized by cutting right into a sprinkler. That sprinkler is sprinkling on the suburban lawn of Mike Wheeler's family, and he's down in the classic 80s carpeted basement playing D&D with Will, Lucas, and Dustin. When Will makes a wild roll and sends the dice flying, Mike's mom enters and the game kind of grinds to a halt, just as the guys were about to face a dreaded boss monster called the Demigorgon. Parents, man. They put a pin in it and make a plan to play next weekend. Then some sweet vaporwave synth tunes kick in, and all the kids head home for the night. Oh, and Dustin definitely stops on his way out of the house to hit on Mike's sister Nancy. She's like 16 and he's like 12, so it goes how you'd expect. The only problem is Will's favorite shortcut goes right through the restricted government land adjacent to the lab, and that land must be bumpy because he immediately wipes out on his bike. Hearing some snarling from the bushes, he makes a run for home and bolts the front door, but no one's home except the family dog. While its barking seems to briefly distract the creature, our brave boy gets a rifle from the shed and even gets the thing loaded, but suddenly looks up as the light bulb in the shed overheats and seems to disappear in front of our eyes. That's not exactly what happened, but it's presented that way because at this point we only know what the townspeople know, which is not much. Will is missing, and something is stalking the woods of Hawkins. The next morning, the news is reporting on strange power surges causing exploding light bulbs and outages all over town. And Will's mom Joyce pays a visit to the police chief Jim Hopper to report his disappearance. Hopper has a dad bod, a dad stash, and starts every day with a beer and a smoke, but he seems like a good guy at heart, and eventually, after his morning donut to be specific, he takes the case. Which I guess he sort of has to since it's his literal job. At Hawkins Middle School, Lucas, Dustin, and Mike are also wondering where Will is and dealing with some typical douchebag 80s bullies at the same time. Also at the same time, Nancy is in the bathroom making out with her new boyfriend Steve Harrington. They make a date to meet later and study. Sure, and the people watching this video are studying right now too. Across town at the government lab, a bunch of very serious men in hazmat suits are going down an elevator shaft with flashlights and Uzis. So at this point, it's a race between the government and Jim Hopper to track down whatever creature seems to have taken Will. But before the hunt even starts, we've already seen characters make some crucial mistakes, so let's pause and reflect on our journey so far. First and foremost, if your kid is missing, you can and should report that immediately, like as soon as you can verify you don't know their location. A lot of people think you're supposed to wait 24 hours before reporting a missing person, but that is a myth. In almost all of the United States, there's no waiting period for reporting a person you know has gone missing. And in fact, when it comes to missing children, the experts say the first 48 hours are the most crucial. That means if you give it a day, you're already wasting half of that time. Joyce, Will's mom, does seem to act pretty quickly, but there is a vibe of wanting to wait it out at first, which is made worse by the fact that Will's big brother was supposed to confirm he got home that night and did not do that. At that point, Joyce assumes Will just got up really early and went to school, and that's the point at which she should probably already be calling the cops, or just call the school and ask them to do a sweep. Then call the cops. It's definitely worth it to risk wasting a little police time to find a missing child, especially if your kid routinely rides his bike through a restricted government facility's backyard, which is a whole other problem. Honestly, finding a missing child is probably something most cops are happy to be able to do for the community, versus writing parking tickets or whatever the cops do. Unfortunately for Joyce and Will, Hawkins' police chief is late and hungover every day, so she was never actually going to get her report in before Jim got his ass up and down to the station. This feels like the writers letting us know that Joyce isn't an irresponsible mom. A bunch of things had to go wrong for this to happen. The question is, how do we fix it? Well, first we get to learn a little bit more about what it is. The hazmat guys shine their lights across some kind of fleshy tentacle nest the monster clearly came out of, and mention a girl who can't have gotten far. Cue a scene of a small girl with a shaved head and a filthy hospital gown wandering aimlessly around town. She ends up sneaking into a diner's kitchen to scam some fries, and it seems like she's been starved and potentially tested on or mistreated. She fails her stealth check though, and the cook nabs her. He's mad at first, but quickly realizes she's in distress and upgrades her meal to include a burger and a free t-shirt. He tries to introduce himself as Benny, but it turns out our girl doesn't even know what a handshake is and has a pretty unusual name that's also tattooed on her arm. 11. Kind of like a numbered experiment subject, huh? Or maybe a really weird homeschooled kid who's been abused and ran off. Benny calls around town to try and find out, so he doesn't even notice when 11 uses telekinetic powers to make a screechy fan stop, which really lends credit to the experimental subject theory. Back at school, Lucas, Mike, and Dustin get pulled out of AV Club, where they're playing around with a new super powerful ham radio so they can be questioned about the night before. They tell Hopper about Will's shortcut, and he goes to check it out, warning them to go all straight home after school and not try to help out with the investigation, aka have spooky adventures, so you know they're totally going to anyway. Joyce and Will's big brother check all his usual spots and wander the woods, calling for him to no avail. The cops find Will's abandoned bike, and the manhunt kicks into high gear. We're calling exes and extended family. We're making "I'm missing" posters, you know, the works. Hopper tells Joyce about the bike and inspects the buyer's home, and eventually his intuition leads him to the shack out back where we know Will disappeared. The light bulb inside is still acting weird, and Jim also finds a hole at the base of the wall and hears some slimy sounds as something he can't see retreats deeper into it. Not good. There's a huge search party scouring the town and woods all afternoon, and most of the parents are keeping their kids inside until Will is found. This totally pisses Nancy off because now she can't go make out with Steve Harrington some more. It pisses Mike off too because he'd rather be out helping with the search, and Mike's mom gets pissed because their dad won't help discipline either of them. Basically, everyone is pissed off at Mike's house except the baby. Mike storms down to the basement and uses walkie-talkies to do what he can do from there. The adult search team stay out with flashlights all night, but all they accomplish is an E.T. homage and a simple dialogue scene where we get to overhear a little of Jim's history, namely that his daughter died a few years back and his marriage fell apart. Kind of explains the cigs, drinking, and general bad attitude. Eventually, the kids do break curfew and sneak out to look for Will. They all make little mystery team detective packs and ride out into the night like the three Hardy Boys. Mike crosses paths with Steve, who's sneaking into Nancy's room at the same time to look for something else. Just ask your parents to explain it to you if you don't know what I'm talking about. Nancy is worried about getting busted at first, but Steve calls himself a ninja a few times, and that seems to calm her down, at least until he gets way too pushy and she completely cuts him off. Hey, I mean, consent is important. Better luck next time, Steve. Just do better, man. Maybe. I don't know. Totally redeem yourself and become a good guy, and then we'll talk. At Will's house, Joyce and big brother Jonathan get a bizarre phone call with Will's breathing noises on the other end, and a little lightning bolt shoots out. More weird electrical stuff, Meanwhile, Benny and Eleven are still chilling at the diner that night when there's a perfectly innocent knock on the door. Benny answers, and a super nice lady from social services says she's here to help Eleven find a good home or get hooked into the adoption system. Then she totally shoots him dead with a silenced PP9 James Bond style, which I promise you they did not teach at social services school. That's enough to tip Elle off that this chick is bad news, so she bolts into the woods yet again, busting right past two more agents by physically throwing a bunch of kitchen stuff at their heads. As fate would have it, she runs right into the guys. What's up, meat shields? Winter is here, and let's be honest, it can get pretty darn cold. But what if I told you there's a way to turn that cold into pure gold? That's where our friends over at Golden Nugget Online Casino come in. We've teamed up this winter to bring you a killer offer. This season, while you're stuck inside, ditch the usual winter blues and say hello to the Vegas vibes that you can experience right at home. Golden Nugget Online Casino brings you all your favorite casino games straight to your device. I mean, we're freaking talking 300 slots, blackjack, roulette, and even live dealer games all at your fingertips. And the best part? Golden Nugget is safe, secure, and reliable. In fact, it's the perfect place to have some fun and potentially win big. Alright players, listen up. Golden Nugget Online Casino is giving you a shot at $1,000 in casino credits, plus a deposit match for up to $1,000 in casino bonus funds. So, what are you waiting for? Download the Golden Nugget Online Casino app right now and sign up using my promo code HOWTOBEAT. That's HOWTOBEAT at checkout. A minimum of $5 deposit is required, but trust me, it's worth it. So instead of death games this winter, let's play some card games. Download the Golden Nugget Online Casino app today and use code HOWTOBEAT at sign up. And now let's get back to the show. Which is where their survival plans runs right into trouble. Remember, the goal was to find Will somewhere in the woods, and there's already a town full of adults, including cops, sweeping the area doing just that. I'm not exactly clear on what special knowledge or skill set Mike, Lucas, and Dustin have that will make them any more likely to stumble across their missing friend, though. In a show, I totally understand why our heroes would answer the call to adventure and friendship, but in real life, as hard as it may be to wait in a situation where all you want to do is act, sometimes that is the most productive option. We see that in the show, as Joyce and Jonathan do everything they can to spread the word about Will in a world without social media. The true nightmare. So maybe when there are monsters roaming the streets and kids missing, don't break curfew to pressure your new girlfriend into having sex with you while her parents are home. Steve. Again, I'm not saying don't act once you know someone is missing, just the opposite. But if you've filed the reports and helicopters with spotlights are sweeping the neighborhood, please don't go hunting through the woods alone at night, in the exact area where a kidnapping probably just happened. The obvious, most likely result is that you could go missing as well, whether that means falling into the same hole Will did, or by getting abducted by the same alien serial killer. Whatever did it, it's likely still out there. Now, moving on to someone who does have a very special set of skills, and I'm not talking about Jim Hopper, or even Liam Neeson in Taken. I'm talking about Eleven. This early in the story, we don't know much about her, but we have already pieced together a few key facts. She came from the lab. She has telekinesis, probably as a result of some kind of test or experiment in which she was the 11th subject. she should never trust social services, and she has freaking telekinesis. This is a show with a lot of Dungeons and Dragons in it, and as a player, I have to say, you can do tons more with Mage Hand or any number of other telekinesis spells. So get creative. We know 11 can throw giant restaurant-sized tomato cans and drawers full of knives and forks. Maybe stuff a backpack with knives from the diner, and you've got an instant protective wall of psychic shrapnel all around you whenever you need it. Could 11 have used the same amount of mental force to rip the guns right out of the agent's hands? Seems like it, if she can whirlwind a room full of kitchen stuff. Hopefully the guys can combine their improv skills with 11's supernatural powers and unlock some cooler moves other than throw can and scavenge for fries. First, though, they need to figure out who she is and what she can do. So the 4 kids retreat back to the basement and the guys ask 11 a bunch of questions. Like Benny, Mike is able to see how traumatized she's been and gets her to open up just a little, say a few words, and change into a fresh set of clothes that's not just an XXXL burger tee. She even tries to change right in front of them, so it's clear that on top of handshakes, she isn't used to concepts like privacy either. Lucas guesses that she escaped from a local mental institution and argues that they should all come clean with their moms and let the adults take over, but Mike overrules them. Instead, he plans to just let 11 stay over for one night, have her ring the doorbell in the morning, and then let the parents take care of it without knowing that they all broke curfew. Smart. Or is it? Hopper spends the morning with Joyce and Jonathan, but things are tense. Joyce's mental state is extremely frayed for obvious reasons, and Hopper trying to brush off her electric phone call as something the storm did not improve her mood. It becomes clear that they were once an item, so they know how to push each other's buttons. And Joyce shuts Hop down hard by comparing Will's being missing with his dead daughter. He trudges off upset, but more determined than ever to bring Will home. At Mike's house, it's time for breakfast both upstairs and in the basement, as 11 tries her first toaster waffle and a love affair for the ages begins. I mean 11 and waffles, not Mike and 11, for the record. Mike tries to convince Elle to do his plan, but with just a few words and hand motions, she gets him to understand that the people after her will shoot them both without hesitation. So maybe she ought to just keep laying low and eating delicious waffles for a bit until this all blows over, you know? Steve continues to slowly corrupt sweet, innocent Nancy, using his skill in the art of peer pressure to talk her into coming to a house party he's throwing while his parents are out of town. At the same time, his alignment continues to be chaotic douche, as we see him laugh off Jonathan's pain about Will, which is a big old turnoff for Nancy. Mike waits until the house is empty and then introduces 11 to the wonders of 1983. You know, like Yoda toys and recliner technology. Speaking of little wrinkled aliens, this scene is so clearly inspired by E.T. that Elle even ends up hiding in the closet when Mike's mom comes home. It's a school day, so Mike has to tell Mom the classic "I don't feel good" kid lie. But 11 doesn't have it so easy. She seems to recognize Will from a picture in Mike's room, and that combined with the darkness of the closet triggers a traumatic memory of being ripped away from a man she calls Papa, who we recognize as one of the scientists with Uzis from the lab. Okay, quick character check-in. Joyce at this point is completely broken, a single mom with a missing kid and getting really intense to deal with. She takes out a cash advance from the grocery store where she works and uses some of it to buy a new phone, since the old one got struck by lightning from the inside. Then she goes home and sits in the dark, cradling her new phone in her lap, hoping her son's missing breathing to call her back, which isn't creepy at all. Hopper's coppers find Benny dead from apparent suicide, obviously staged after the fact, and fail to connect it to the case. Lucas and Dustin come to Mike's house and are pretty freaked out to find that 11 is wanted and still hiding in their friend's basement. Luke even tries to tell an adult, but Elle slams the door on him with her mind, which also causes her nose to bleed. Uh-oh, maybe we need to modify our understanding of her powers. Maybe it's more of a slowly leveling up until she's finally OP sort of thing. Alright, since we've already established a few times that she's being chased by some seriously bad folks, I personally think establishing the limits of her powers should be a top priority. That Dungeons & Dragons spell I mentioned, Mage Hand for example, can only carry 10 pounds at a time. There's a lot you can do with that, but it obviously has some built-in limits. Using a bunch of household objects of different sizes, or better yet, weights if they have some, maybe Mike and the gang should have tried to figure out exactly what tools are at their disposal in their epic fight against the government, instead of trying to explain to a girl why Yoda is so cool. That's a dangerous game, my friend. We are talking about a group of AV nerds here, so I could easily see them transitioning their base of operations from Mike's house to the school grounds, which are much larger and with more natural hiding space for Eleven. Plus, at a school, people are less likely to notice food missing, and Elle really only has to dodge some nighttime security, instead of huddle in a blanket fort all night so that she doesn't wake anyone in the house up. But the real benefit of at least briefly swinging by a school would be to raid it for potentially useful supplies, from survival and first aid supplies to chemicals and equipment. Hey, I mean, you're fighting aliens, secret agents, and mad scientists here. You never know what might come in handy. And in a show like this, with characters like these, them improvising some kind of a trap or bomb at a crucial moment isn't out of the question. While they're at the school though, another thing they might consider is looping in their AV teacher, who we only saw in a single scene so far, but seems just as nerdy as them, and like he definitely has a special place in his heart for this group. Also, why are the options just to tell mom or not? You can tell any adult, and who you pick makes a big difference. A fellow sci-fi tech nerd who isn't your parent is probably going to fly off the handle a little less because they aren't so directly responsible for your safety. I mean, just ask any parent. When your kid is in danger, it's hard to think clearly for a lot of reasons. And remember, it's not like their teacher has to take their word for it. Eleven can prove she has telekinesis, which should be more than enough to at least keep a thoughtful adult from immediately calling the authorities on her. Look, the point is, if you're going to take your chances on a confession, think carefully about who's the safest person to disclose your situation to. That goes for an abusive relationship or a weird government conspiracy. Back to the story. Jonathan goes to see Lonnie, his dad, and Joyce's ex-husband. Things are obviously not cool between them, and he yells at Lonnie for not caring enough about him and Will. Hopper questions one of the old dudes who saw Eleven stealing fries at the diner and mistakenly thinks she might be Will with a shaved head. I guess running away from home or hiding out in the woods or something. Lucas and Dustin are having dinner at Mike and Nancy's, and Nancy makes up a story so she can get out of the house and go to the rager Steve invited her to. Dustin likewise makes up a spasm so he can slam the table and distract Mom from Eleven sneaking out in the background. That night, the search party resumes, and one of the townspeople finally finds a clue, which looks like some kind of hospital bracelet Eleven probably ditched during her escape from the lab. It's right by a storm pipe that leads directly into the complex, so Hopper figures that that's the next logical place to go look for Will. The guy who found the tag says that it's impossible that any kid would be brave enough to crawl through a pitch-black storm pipe into a government facility, but Hopper says where there's a will, there's a way. Just kidding, that would be stupid. Speaking of stupid, or ignorant at least, the three boys have to explain the concept of friendship to Eleven, which is both cute and deeply sad. Then they all spit swear, which basically means that Elle has officially joined their little RPG party, likely as some kind of caster, probably a sorcerer since her powers are innate. Feels like a glass cannon build, but I digress. With fresh spit on her hands, Eleven uses Mike's D&D set to show off a new telepathic power, clairvoyance. She can sense the general direction Will is lost in and says he's moving around a lot, hiding from something she represents with a figurine they've been using as their ultimate boss, the Demigorgon. Getting back to stupid, Nancy asks her wing woman Barb to come along to Steve's party and make sure she doesn't do anything stupid that she'll regret. Jonathan also shows up at the party, but only because he was in the forest looking for Will and heard one of the partiers screaming. He spots Nancy, Barb, and Steve chilling by the pool shotgunning beers and taking some really creepy pictures of them through the bushes. Whatever, thought you were worried about your brother, but okay, little side trip to take pictures of teenagers getting drunk and pushing each other into the pool. Barb cuts her hand while cutting a beer can open and goes to the bathroom to tend to it. So either Barb is about to die, or this whole group of kids, including the three main characters, is about to die. things aren't looking good for Barb. We briefly catch up with Chief Hopper again on his balcony, crushing butts, ignoring his hot girlfriend and brooding like Batman as he tries to figure out the best way to recover a runaway kid from a locked-down laboratory and/or the sewers. Joyce gets another late-night call from Will, and this time he's even able to say the word mom before, yet again, her phone fries itself, and all the lights in the house go crazy as if possessed. Things get increasingly poltergeisty as a set of flashing lights leads her into Jonathan's room, where a boombox starts to play his and Jonathan's favorite tunes, Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. When some kind of apparition flexes through her wall, she's faced with the same decision, and at first runs out of the house screaming, as I think most of us would. But where Joyce is different is that she stops, turns off the car, and heads back inside to face her fears. Pretty badass, Joyce. Back at the party, Steve and Nancy go upstairs to hook up, leaving poor Barb sitting alone on the diving board. Some blood drips from her wound into the pool. Whether that called the creature from hiding or not, it's here. The monster that we still haven't caught a glimpse of heaves her up off the ground and carries her away screaming. Jonathan rushes to capture some pictures of it, but quite hilariously, he took too many creep photos from the bushes and is in the middle of reloading his film, so he misses the shot. Sorry, pre-cell phone times, you lose again. The creature drags Barb down into another one of its tentacly root nests in what looks like a bizarro version of the swimming pool that she was just sitting at. This darker version is shrouded in ash and looks post-apocalyptic, but she only gets a second to take it all in before she's gobbled up. Hashtag justice for Barb. Come to think of it, this is only our second kill in the series, unless you count the nameless scientist at the very beginning, who's less of a character and more like an appetizer. It's a good reminder that a good horror series can create a lot of tension without necessarily dropping a lot of bodies. It's also a good reminder that the whole time we've been worried about government agents and psychic runaways. There's also a frickin' monster on the loose who seems to keep eating people and might be prank calling Winona Ryder in an effort to drive her insane. It's hard to give much practical survival advice on how to beat the Demigorgon at this point, since we know so little about it, but like a lot of horror things starring teens, a lot of trouble would be saved if they could just keep it in their pants for a few weeks until the situation is resolved. Am I right or am I right? Or at least keep from splitting up. Have you ever heard of the buddy system? Yet here's Jonathan. Troubled Jonathan. Greasy bowl cut Jonathan. Doing the exact thing I said you shouldn't, going off into the woods alone at night without telling anyone, and with no weapons or other means of defense, and no way to contact people if you ever get in trouble, or more than just a camera at least. It doesn't even really increase his survival odds that Johnny happens to be near a raging house party full of people either, because it's just that, raging. If a serial killer, secret agent, or Demigorgon slipped up behind him, there's no way anyone would hear it over the music and shrill laughter of people losing their virginity. Frankly, he's lucky the Demigorgon already seemed to have a taste for Barb flesh. But no one listens to Hopper. Everyone has to run back into the woods looking for Will on their own, or go back into the clearly haunted house instead of finding literally any other person to go in with you, or stand outside so that they can hear you scream for help. Honestly, we might have lost one of our characters with the most survival savvy right up top. Will navigated things pretty damn well, and as an accomplished dungeon master, has trained his mind to improvise and solve problems creatively. Even more impressively, as we'll soon find out, he's been able to survive in a world of supernatural horrors all on his own the whole time he's been missing. Back in Hawkins proper though, it seems like most of the weight is likely to land on Hopper and Eleven. Late that night when the party breaks up, Nancy makes the walk of shame home in Steve's sweatshirt and gets chewed out by her mom for coming in so late. She feels a little weird and awkward when she goes back to school the next day and has to talk to Steve again, plus Barb is mysteriously absent. But he does his best to reassure her, and it seems like they're still crushing on each other. Her parents are officially worried about her behavior though. She's acting out, as they say. So is Joyce, in the sense that she's become convinced Will is reaching out mentally to control the electrical wiring in their house and communicate with her from wherever he is. Jonathan is afraid she's losing her grip on reality, but of course he just saw a monster and hangs out taking secret pictures of naughty teens, so he's not really in a position to judge. The kids, meanwhile, take my advice from earlier and expand their inventories with some more practical monster fighting gear, at least by kid standards. We're talking a combat knife, binoculars, camouflage, and a slingshot. These guys obviously watched Home Alone. Oh no, wait, that's impossible. This is set in 1983. Okay, the Duffer Brothers obviously watched Home Alone. Anyway, Dustin also brings rations, which is smart, but it's all candy and chips, which is not. He also finally starts to get curious about what Eleven can and can't do, and how many magic points she can spend before her nose starts to bleed. The boys have to leave for school before any such displays of mental might, but once they're gone, she totally does start levitating stuff just for funsies, and sneak around the house to try out all the things she's missed out on, like TV. Eleven watches an ad and quickly learns the most important thing she'll ever need to know: the Coca-Cola logo. This triggers another flashback to a series of invasive tests her papa forced her to take part in at the lab. We kind of already guessed that, but here's the confirmation. After a long night of brainstorming, Hop's big plan to get into the government lab is to drive up the front gate and ask really nicely. He promises they'll only take 10 minutes and plays on the guards' sympathies to gain access, where he points out a security camera that would have likely caught whoever crawled through the storm pipe and left their wristband thing behind. The guys in suits are cagey and insist that it's impossible that anyone could have broken in or out of the facility. They even prove it by showing Hopper a tape of the security footage with no kid. But he knows it's been edited because it completely cuts out the night of the storm. No rain on the tape. Real screw up by the government guys, but honestly, Hop knows they're lying, but he can't quite prove it yet and is forced to leave. Mike and Nancy are kind of going through the same issues at the moment. Nancy gets made fun of at lunch for having sex with Steve, and Lucas starts to rag on Mike for clearly feeling some kind of way about Eleven. There are angry denials all around, and those crappy bullies come back to make Mike's life even more miserable and tease them about Will. Under the school, Jonathan is in the darkroom developing his voyeur pics by hand the old-fashioned way, at least until he gets caught by another student and scurries away like a cockroach from a kitchen light. Okay, look, this is not a dating channel, and we don't teach you how to beat crappy relationships. But I will say, Steve is still throwing out a lot of red flags. Nancy, you might want to keep an eye on that, and maybe keep a closer eye on your little brother while you're at it. After all, his best friend is missing and presumed dead by a lot of the town. If you really paid attention, you might even notice that he's quite obviously hiding someone in the house. Of course, I could understand why a young woman navigating her first real relationship might be distracted or not care too much what her kid brother is up to, so for now, we'll give Nancy a pass. Jonathan has no such excuse. He's single, his actual brother is the one missing, which he's obviously super concerned about, and he just saw a monster come out of the woods and eat one of his classmates. He may not have the picture of the monster to prove his story, but he does have a bunch of pictures of Steve's house party to prove he was there, and from the angle he was shooting, he almost certainly has the last known picture of Barb. Hopper might want to be able to use that information to zero in on Will or put some more pressure on the government guys. Or if Jonathan's not ready to make that connection, he could easily tell his mom that she's probably not crazy and confirm that something legitimately strange is going down in Hawkins. Lastly, it feels pretty weak sauce that Dustin, Lucas, and Mike settle for a wrist rocket when we've already seen Will break out a hunting rifle and get swooped up right away. We don't usually recommend children carry guns on this channel, and in case anyone from the FBI is watching, this is not that. But I will say that if you're being hunted by an interdimensional monster and your friend is a ghost now, I could see making an exception. I mean, even the FBI watch this show, so they know what the f I'm talking about. You don't need an AR-15 to hunt deer, but you may just need one to bring down the Demigorgon. Hawkins is a sleepy farm town, It's pretty likely the guys could round up some rifles or shotguns if they really tried. Forget going to school or protecting yourself from bullies. You guys now know that magic powers exist and people willing to kill are hunting you down. You have bigger fish to fry than your next chemistry test, even if it will get you in trouble with your parents. Cut the crap, arm up, put 11 on point, and then make your move. But arming yourself is about a lot more than weaponry. It's about information as well, and we're about to get a whole bunch of it dumped on our characters. Hopper and a deputy hit the local library and study up on the Hawkins National Laboratory and its long history of shady doings and intense secrecy in and around the area. They even stumble upon claims that the lab was used as a part of MK Ultra, a secret government project designed to produce advanced human super soldiers. Does it sound like anyone we've met in the show so far? Any little girls named 11, maybe? Checking back in with all the high school drama, word gets around that Jonathan was perving on the party and Steve and his cronies confront him about it in the parking lot and smashes his camera as punishment. The nice girl in Nancy shines through as Steve's group saunters off, and she pauses to help Jonathan gather some of his things, and spots the picture of Barb on the diving board in the process. She can't let it go, and eventually ditches Steve right before the big game to go track down Jonathan and get some questions answered. Questions like, did you hear they invented TCP networking protocols this year? That's the thing that will eventually become the internet, which is what YouTube hosts will use to look up obscure things that happened in 1983 so they can drop the info in their videos. At the same time, the cops are pouring through old newspapers and microfiche. Joyce and Will are slowly learning to communicate using a system of hundreds of lamps and Christmas lights strung up all over the house. Will is able to control the lights from beyond, first to flash once for yes and twice for no. But eventually Joyce gets the bright idea. Get it? Bright? Sorry, to paint an alphabet on the wall with corresponding lights above each letter. This allows her to determine that Will is alive, not safe, and right here. Before she can figure out exactly what this means, another message comes through from the other side. Run. Just then, what we're pretty sure is a full-on Demigorgon finally bursts into our world and onto the scene in all its gooey glory, chasing Joyce from the house. This time, she does not change her mind and go back. A little earlier in the day, Lucas, Mike, and Dustin head to a secret spot after school where they're supposed to meet 11. She's already there, and in the middle of more traumatizing flashbacks and freakouts about the time she spent locked up in the lab being tested on and honing in her telekinetic powers. Her papa seems to have had total control over her, although she is able to knock out guards and henchmen at will as long as she doesn't mind a little blood on her upper lip. The guys show up and she and Mike take the lead, while Dustin and Lucas hang back like good wingmen so their boy can do his thing. In this case, that means telling Elle about how bullies tripped him at school today. Smooth. What a total lady killer. By the time that they get near the area where Will went missing, it's fully dark, and a convoy of cop cars, fire trucks, and ambulances race by. They hop on their bike and give chase, catching up to Hopper just as he parks, responding to a call from the quarry, a call about a body. Hiding behind a truck, they watch as what looks like Will's body is hauled from the water, pale and lifeless. I know we just had Will's spirit personally tell us he's alive, and 11 said she can sense that he was alive, and they never show a close-up of the body, so you can't identify Will's face. But if you've never seen a TV show before, you might actually believe that Will is dead, and get really sad at this scene. Feel free to. The acting is good. The music is good. I'm just saying, Will ain't gonna stay dead. Clearly. I mean, this is like episode 3 of 8. But Mike, Dustin, and Lucas think that he is. And at this point, Nancy is pretty sure that Barb is probably dead too. Mike runs home to grieve, angry at 11 for her failure to save the day, while Nancy shows up at Barb's house to tearfully tell her mother that she fears the worst. Let's zoom in on Hopper for a minute though, since from his point of view, the case is finally starting to come together. He says to his deputy that he doesn't believe this is part of some grand conspiracy, at least not yet, but he's become convinced that Will was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the guys up at the lab did something shady to get him out of the picture. Or maybe he was eaten by a monster, or maybe he just disappeared in a light bulb flash. We still don't know. But Hopper does know, or at least strongly suspect, that he's squaring off against vast and powerful government forces ready and willing to lie to the cops, kidnap children, and murder people indiscriminately, while fully expecting to get away with it. Those are long odds, and I'd even go so far as to suggest that a person needs to know their limits when it comes to fighting the entire United States intelligence infrastructure. What I mean is that, considering that he's neither James Bond nor an Avenger, Hopper should probably be more intimidated than he is, and thinking of some ways he can fight back that aren't as direct as driving up and knocking on the front door. Hopper should be calling meetings with his team and getting the word out to journalists that they have a pretty substantial little pile of evidence that there's a link between the Hawkins National Lab and 2 deaths and a disappearance that all occurred within the space of 3 days. Maybe they could even talk their way back into the lab first for another quick look around and gather a little bit more proof before going public. Hidden recording devices were much bigger in the 80s, but then again, Hopper does wear one of those classic big town sheriff hats, which are pretty roomy. Hopper has been a cop for decades. There have to be other people on the force he knows he can trust. Tell them the story, maybe even edit out the craziest sounding parts for now so that they'll believe you, and come at the bad guys as a team instead of a lone ranger and a handful of deputies. As even Hopper himself says at one point, this town hasn't seen crimes this grisly in like 30 years. That's enough to draw the attention of plenty of press, and should be enough to enlist the help on or off the books of plenty of trusted allies. This thing probably goes all the way to the top if it involves MK Ultra, but that doesn't mean the entire middle is compromised. Could anyone at the FBI be trusted with this information and maybe bring some more resources to bear? How about the National Guard? We'll never know because Hopper never looks into it. And keep in mind, he was just recently able to get a big chunk of the town to spend all night in the forest with flashlights, searching the restricted land Will disappeared in, and the lab goons didn't do anything. That means they are concerned enough about a scandal to say, come out and gun down the whole town. They aren't impossible to control because their power depends on secrecy. Focus on taking that away first. That way, even if you go down, there are still people in the know left to pursue the truth. Whistleblowing might not be as sexy as going full detective mode and cracking the case yourself, but it's absolutely more likely to succeed as a strategy. Of course, this is a spooky thrill ride, so Hopper goes the sexy solo route. We're gonna wait and see if it gets him killed, but if his plot armor is as lush and full as his cop mustache, it's probably going to be a long wait. But even though he's an alienated loner for the time being, Hopper still's got a heart of gold, so it's extra hard to watch him break the news to Joyce that the body they found really looks like Will, and their working theory now is that he fell into the quarry in the dark purely by accident and drowned. Whether Hop really believes this simple cover story isn't clear, but Joyce certainly does not, and tells him about her ability to communicate with her missing son via twinkling Christmas lights, as well as the monster that came out of their wall. I want to pause here to point out that Winona Ryder also played Lydia Dietz in Beetlejuice, a woman everyone says is crazy because she lives in a weird messed up house and thinks she can talk to ghosts. I'm just saying. Typecasting maybe? I don't know. Hopper does indeed assume that Joyce is just struggling mentally because of her grief and tries to talk her through it, admitting that after his daughter died, he thought he saw her too. He asks her to come to the morgue the next day to identify Will's body, which he hopes will convince her that this is all in her head. Man, that is easily the most awful way to try and get her to confront her delusions. I do not think a therapist would recommend that as treatment for a grief-shattered mind completely out of touch with reality. But hey, I'm no therapist. I'm not from social services either, so you can just relax. Joyce can't though, and spends the night once again huddled in the dark, this time cradling an axe instead of a phone. Major survival upgrade. Good choice, Joyce. Joyce and Jonathan do go to the morgue the next morning and are shown what looks like Will's body, but Hopper talks to one of the staff and learns that the regular coroner didn't perform the autopsy. It was instead done by someone from the state for reasons that aren't clear. Joyce also asks to see a birthmark on Will's arm, and it's missing. As if that didn't make it clear enough that Will's still out there somewhere, Mike stays pissed at 11 and lays into her for giving him false hope. It's pretty unfair to Elle, but it's also pretty risky considering that she's basically an X-Man. Mike is all, "You aren't my friend anymore. You shouldn't have lied and said Will was alive." And 11 is all, "Listen to your walkie-talkie, asshole," and uses her powers to let Will briefly sing that Clash song to them.
Should I stay or should I go?
Which shuts Mike right the hell up. He asks his mom for another day off of school, which she's more than happy to give him since his friend just drowned. Fair enough, very solid excuse. Hitting Lucas and Dustin on the walkies, he calls an emergency meeting of the Brain Trust. Nancy's also starting to believe something supernatural is happening in Hawkins, but when she tells Steve she thinks she saw a monster in the woods behind his house, he completely blows her off. Jonathan also yells at Joyce in the street, telling her she needs to cut the crazy crap and go to Will's funeral, but she refuses. It's the believers against the non-believers, essentially. In the case of the guys, Mike tries to convince Lucas and Dustin that the breathing they can hear over their walkies is Will, but they're a little skeptical to say the least. But Mike, Joyce, and Nancy will not be defeated, and Mike convinces his friends to at least go to school with him to use the ham radio equipment to try and boost their connection to Will. They aren't necessarily convinced of what he's telling them, but they put together a disguise for 11 and set off to go do the thing I said they should have done 2 days ago. Or in terms of this video, like 20 minutes ago. Nancy tells the police most of everything she knows about what happened to Barb that night, conveniently glossing over the sex with Steve. I mean, her mom is right there, I get it, and the monster in the woods. Piecing together more of Jonathan's ripped picture of Barb from the school parking lot, she notices something pretty strange right at the edge of the frame, namely, a monster in the woods. Okay, they have proof now. Nancy has very strong evidence that there's a monster, or at least some unknown species of predator, stalking around Hawkins and eating all of our barbs. The fact that this is 1983 and Photoshop won't even be invented until 1987 lends even more credence to the shots, since it's pretty unlikely that it's been doctored. All this only highlights the need to start revealing some of this stuff to the whole town, or at least call a big meeting of all the people directly involved and compare notes. This entire time, we've basically been following 4 separate groups who only interact occasionally, all working the same problem but separately. The earlier you can start building that coalition of believers, the better. All throughout Season 1, the Stranger Things crew have a bad habit of dragging their feet, perhaps because what they're being confronted with seems so unlikely, which it is. I totally get that, monsters and magic and whatnot. But by this point, several of those characters have had what they can only be described as direct, first-hand experience with supernatural events or beings. It's time to believe what your senses are telling you and act accordingly. While Nancy, Mike, and Joyce are all starting to do that, it's in an uncoordinated and highly emotionally driven way. It's completely normal to be emotional given the circumstances, but it's in a crisis situation like this that it becomes the most crucial to take a beat, calm yourself, and do your best to formulate a plan of action based on the info at hand and your best instincts. And if you can pool your resources, knowledge included, with other people who are highly motivated to accomplish the same goal you are, you're gonna have a big advantage. Communication, coordination, and consolidation should be the name of the game at this point. But maybe Nancy is worried about being believed. After all, most people still don't believe in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, and we have pics of both of them too. Hey, you know who hasn't done anything productive in a long time? The lab guys. They've mainly been stalking around the woods and throwing Hopper off the scent, but frankly seem to be just as confused as everyone else about what the hell is going on. So they try to figure out what's inside the weird Fleshy Rift the first Demogorgon came out of by sending a man in, but he quickly reaches the end of his rope. So does Mike when he sees his bullies laughing about Will at the school assembly announcing his death. Mike pushes one down and 11 makes him wet his pants, which is definitely the power I would want most of all her powers. Think about what you could do with that. Presidential debates, the Olympics medal ceremonies, a Taylor Swift show? I mean, the possibilities are endless. But regardless, the 4 sets of main characters all keep pursuing their own strategies for finding Will. Hopper tracks down the cop who called in Will's body at a bar, and then outside the bar, and then punches him until he admits the shady guys from the state ordered him to report the body, and Eleven to not let anyone get too close. He's clearly being watched by the lab guys too, who drive off. Nancy and Jonathan get together and admit that they both saw a faceless creature in the woods that night, then decide that they have to do something about it. Joyce has the most success, literally seeing Will through a red membrane that forms in her wall and then seals back up. The kids are able to overhear their conversation thanks to Eleven and their ham radio, and he describes a place that's like home but dark and cold before running away again to hide from whatever's chasing him wherever he is. Performing the radio trick eventually shorts the system out and overwhelms Eleven, tapping her power and making her all bloody-nosed and disoriented. So the guys quickly get her out of there. Joyce hacks through the wall with her hatchet to try and get to Will, but all she does is put a big hole in her wall, which probably isn't going to help her reputation in the neighborhood as the local crazy lady. Jonathan and Nancy enlarge their pool photo to get a closer look at the Demigorgon, and Hopper punches out another fellow cop to get a closer look at Will, who's totally just a wax dummy filled with pillow stuffing. You know, you gotta wonder whose job it is to sit in the bowels of a government facility and make stuffed models of dead kids. Come to think of it, Longlegs would totally love that job. But this video isn't about how to beat Longlegs, who just kind of beats himself if you leave him to his own devices long enough. This video is about beating a government conspiracy and a handful of monsters from another dimension. Stranger things have happened, and the government guys are finally properly looking into it. The guy Eleven used to call Papa is sending dudes through the rift to fish for demigorgons. As usual, the government forces aren't nearly as organized or capable as you would hope, and fail at basically every turn. Still, there are a whole lot of them, and only a few good guys on the board, so protecting the assets you do have is going to be key from here on out. For example, remember when I said we should be testing the limits of Eleven's psychic abilities? It seems like we've done that. We might not be clear on all the rules of how it all works, but we can safely say that she has a limited amount of mojo to use at a time, and making kids wet their pants in this world is a whole lot easier than reaching out to the other dimension. In fact, doing so basically disables her for a minute, and since she's the only one of the 4 kids who can do magic, you're not going to want to pull that trigger too often. Like, is she going to get brain damage at some point? This should be a concern. Also, they've established that Will is out there somewhere a few times, and a few different ways now. Rather than trying to confirm that again, I suggest letting Eleven save up her power for a while, or at least take a break from taxing it so heavily. Also, guns! Again, get guns. I don't always say this to kids, but how have you guys not gotten guns yet? I know I already said that, but it bears repeating, especially since as far as we know, the Demigorgons are basically big scary animals. Or, forget the kids, Hopper is out there punching guys out in broad daylight and sneaking into the lab by, let me check my notes here, punching guys out. Don't get me wrong, it's super badass, but you carry a big ol' revolver for a reason, man. And that reason is not to impotently point it at the bad guys' cars as they drive away like you did back at the bar. Joyce, you just keep doing what you're doing. Honestly, you're the wild card of the bunch. You seem completely erratic, and everyone writes you off, but you've already figured out how to talk to Will and make the barrier between worlds apparently appear with no mutant powers whatsoever. This is, unless you count the power of a mother's love as a superpower, which I don't. Sorry, Mom. I love you, but you're not the fucking Green Lantern. I wish you were, but it's just not gonna happen. Our pal Hop is able to break back into the Hawkins National Lab pretty dang easy with a combination of sneaking and punching, which does eventually escalate all the way to gun pointing when he's confronted by a couple security guys and remember that he has one as well. Dropping out of stealth mode, he walks the hallways until he finds Eleven's old room and starts to piece together some of what we've already learned from her flashbacks. He even makes it all the way to the dimensional rift, which is looking goopier all the time. But his luck finally runs out and he gets a syringe to the neck for his trouble. Hopper wakes up the next morning with a visible syringe mark on him, as if the government guys really thought he would think it was a dream or something, which is just a terrible plan. Why on earth would he buy that? Just kill him, guys. You cover up murders routinely. Hopper tears the place apart and quickly finds a planted surveillance device, which actually does turn out to be surprisingly small considering the limitation of 1980s technology. Eleven, meanwhile, tries to explain where Will is to the others, in a place she calls the Upside Down. Mike is the first one to put together that the Upside Down is actually an alternate dimension, a dark dimension with a perfect but sinister copy of Hawkins inside it, and also an unknown number of demigorgons. 1 Will Byers, and probably 1 dead Barb. Dustin says it's a veil of shadows, a plane out of phase, an echo of our world, and some other things that a hardcore nerd would call the multiverse. The only problem is, 11 has no idea how to get back there, or to get Will back here. Lonnie drops in on Joyce and tries to convince her that she's losing it, because what are ex-husbands for if not to double down and rub your nose in what's already bothering you? Jonathan isn't too happy that his estranged father has decided to crash on the couch, but when Lonnie insists that he's only here to help Joyce, John relents and seems to come to his senses. Then Lonnie tells him his Evil Dead poster is inappropriate. Just so you know, the show still considers him an asshole overall. Jonathan heads upstairs and gets dressed for his little brother's funeral, which would be very sad, except that in this case, it's actually a funeral for a mannequin. Nevertheless, Lonnie does get both Jonathan and Joyce to attend the fake burial, where Dustin smiles and cracks jokes about how Will is still alive, which has to look really messed up to the other funeral goers. Like, hey, why is that kid with no front teeth laughing as we bury Will? That seems messed up, right? At the wake afterward, Jonathan shows Nancy a map of all the Demigorgon sightings, and they're able to narrow down a small search area where they think it's taken up residence. Jonathan plans to try and track and kill the thing, and has thankfully been through enough scrapes in life to know that he's probably gonna need a gun for that. Yeah, Nancy, get it together. We also see the agents from the lab following a trail of clues and closing in on 11's location, while Mike and the guys get the multiverse concept explained to them a little bit more clearly by their AV teacher, Mr. Clark. He even does the thing where you stab a pen through a folded up piece of paper, which I honestly could ban from movies and shows for 10 years. It's not a bad metaphor, it's just played out. Find some other way to represent the multiverse for a while, sci-fi writers. Maybe stab a javelin through a honeycomb, or a laser through a prism or something. I do like the stabbing part though. Keep that. Anyway, Mr. Clark says the only way that they could ever hope to travel to the Upside Down, or theoretically get Will back, would be to harness enough energy to create a rip in space-time. It's apparently more power than human technology is capable of creating, at least in 1983, so even though he doesn't know, he's basically telling them that they're out of luck. Although obviously something generated enough power to zap Will to the Upside Down in the first place, and create what seems like a pretty permanent portal between the two dimensions at the National Lab. More on that later. For now, Hopper's deputies wake him up to tell him 2 local hunters went missing near the lab. Man, Hawkins has more missing persons than a milk carton factory, which is a joke that would make more sense in the mid-1980s. Look it up. See, they used to... You know what? Never mind. Let's stay on track. Hopper tells the deputies he's taking on the case of the missing hunters personally, and the deputies tell him that some state troopers found Barb's car at the bus station and are considering her a runaway. We already know the Stadies are in on it though, so yeah, we're not buying that for 1 second. Down in Mike's basement, Dustin has a brainstorm and realizes that if a dimensional gate exists, then its power source must be generating a huge electromagnetic field. That power draws all the compass needles in town in the wrong directions away from true north, which I feel like a hiker or a surveyor would have already discovered at some point, but fine. Conveniently, the kids can literally just follow the pointer to their quest objective like any good modern Bethesda RPG. There's no fast travel though, even if you unlock checkpoints or take an outpost. By which I mean, punch a security guard in the damn face. I'm not gonna harp on the lack of coordination between all the various good guys again, except to say that instead of separately trying to breach the lab, locate Will in the spirit realm, and fight the Demigorgon, it would definitely increase your survival odds if you all made a big posse and did one thing at a time. Think about it. A psychic kid, Hopper with a gun, Jonathan with a gun, Lucas with his wrist rocket, and I guess Mike and Dustin can fight over the binoculars and combat knife. That's enough party members to surround the Demigorgon's lair and attack from all directions. Leave Joyce working on communicating with Will, but have the younger folks stage a distraction on one side of the lab while a small team, probably just Hopper and Jonathan, breaks back in and takes care of business. And given these government goons have already murdered townsfolk, faked a kid's death, tortured a little girl, and put the entire world at risk with their interdimensional shenanigans, I'd urge them to shoot first and ask questions later. Questions like, who funds this? Is this our taxpayer dollars at work? Because maybe let's focus more on repaving roads and running the courthouses and less on the alien monsters and MK Ultras. Okay? Anyways, I guess I did harp on the lack of good guy coordination again quite a bit, but there's at least one other very obvious move here that I have yet to point out. Will's fake body. Hopper knows it's fake, the kids have to assume it's some kind of fakery, and Joyce is obviously strongly convinced of the same. As dramatic and temporarily disruptive as it would be, the strong move here is clearly to run up to the coffin, fling it open, and rip Will's body apart. Imagine that for just a second. Everyone would go completely nuts for a second, but when literal plushy stuffing comes out of the kid instead of the appropriate goos and organs, people are gonna stop and hear you out. No coroner stuffs dead kids with the same thing that goes in couch cushions, and people know that. They know it's damn weird. It's a real Hail Mary, but yeah, I'd straight up ruin this kid's funeral if it were me. I stand by that survival tip, even if it would definitely scar some of the people in the audience for life, especially Will's other school friends. I'm sure some would consider it a dick move though, which segues nicely into, well, any scene about Steve. Except maybe this one? Because, surprise, surprise, Steve actually mans up and apologizes to Nancy for his recent bad behavior. He's got more work to do, but it's a step in the right direction. Nancy even seems open to patching things up, although she does turn him down when he asks her to the movies, and chooses not to tell him that she's about to go on a monster hunt with a baseball bat, even though I think most guys would find that pretty hot. My man even gets downgraded from makeout king to the polite cheek kiss. Ouch. Deserved, but ouch. Things are also strained between Joyce and Lonnie, to say the least. It's become pretty clear that Lonnie only came back because he thinks there's a chance for a big payout if they sue the company that owns the quarry Will fell into. Pretty dark, considering that it's his son as well, and a real True Colors moment from a guy who's been riding the line between maybe Jonathan is too hard on him, and never mind, he's a total waste of space the whole show. And now that the mask is off, Lonnie blames Joyce for Will's death, calls her crazy, and takes off. What a f***ing deadbeat. Finally, it's time for the big moment that we've all been waiting for. The Demogorgon hunt is on. After some flirty target practice, Nancy and Jonathan set off for its territory while our four favorite kids make their way down some Stand By Me railroad tracks towards the dimensional rift. This triggers the most upsetting memory in 11 yet, one of being hooked up to a bunch of electrodes and submerged in a spherical aquarium. Before Nancy and Jonathan make it to the mission area, they get into a big fight about Steve and the broken camera, which honestly had to come up at some point if their relationship was ever going to move forward. The guys keep following their compasses, but they finally realize they've been walking in circles. 11 has intentionally been messing with their compasses to avoid returning to the site of all the horrors that were inflicted upon her. A fresh flashback reveals the full extent of the damage. Papa used her powers, amplified by the sensory deprivation of the bath, to project her into the minds of people on the other side of the world. This was both a way of spying on enemies of the United States, as well as forcing their star pupil to push her abilities further and further. Lucas is wicked pissed at 11 for leading them on a wild goose chase, and has kind of been suspicious of her the whole time. This finally bubbles over, and Lucas accuses Elle of using Mike for food and a bed and calls her a stray dog. Mike tackles him, and they start to fist fight, which you might notice will neither save their friend nor kill a monster. The mission is not going great so far, guys. Even worse, 11 reflexively flings Lucas off of Mike, and he flies into a hunk of metal. After shaking off a potential concussion, he takes off on his own. Chief Hopper, now full-on conspiracy paranoid, but not really paranoid because it's all true, calls his ex-wife and tells her he loves her one last time. then rips the phone out of the wall, probably to keep it from shooting little lightning bolts at him. Phones in Hawkins are deadly, man. He heads back to Joyce's place and fills her in about Will's fake body. They clearly need to formulate a new plan of attack. Deep in the dark and scary woods, Jonathan and Nancy are already putting theirs into action. Their hunt hits a snag when they come across a deer and think that it was hit by a car and decide to put it out of its misery, which you might notice will also not save Will from the upside down or kill a demigorgon. Jonathan raises the gun to fire, but the animal is suddenly wrenched out of sight and his bullet buries in the ground. Nancy follows the sound of dragging and weird creature snarls through the forest, getting separated from Jonathan in the process, and winding up at the base of a tree with another one of those gross dimensional rifts in it. But instead of taking her to Christmas Town like the tree portal in The Nightmare Before Christmas, it takes her to a creepy world of pure terror. Like in The Nightmare Before Christmas, but Halloween Town, not Christmas Town. Jonathan searches for her, passing right by the tree that she got sucked into, whose portal is already sealing itself up. Trapped in the upside down, Nancy stands face to faceless face with a demigorgon, just like she planned. She probably didn't plan to lose her bat, her buddy, and her place in the multiverse, but these things do happen. Well, these things happen if you don't think ahead. I mean, for example, if you got separated from your buddy mere moments ago, you should probably give him 30 seconds or so to catch up. That way, someone at least knows you just climbed into a hole in a tree and vanished. The way Nancy does it, Jonathan completely misses seeing her and seeing the portal closing, so she's truly on her own. On another note, if you're hunting a vicious alien predator, don't waste a bullet on an injured deer. It's sad that the animal is suffering, yes, but you are here to kill an inhuman monster, not completely give away your position with a gunshot. If the demigorgon wasn't stalking you already, it sure would be now. Of course, that doesn't really matter in this case, since it turns out that the demigorgon was just like right out of frame, like seemingly right above the deer by a few feet, which makes it pretty weird that the characters didn't see it in their peripheral vision. But that's a horror problem that crops up a lot in different movies and shows, so we're gonna let that slide. Also, much like letting a dying deer suffer, Lonnie may be very unpleasant, but that doesn't make him wrong. When he says the Sattler Company should pay them a bunch of money for not fencing off their quarry, that's true. Not to mention, he's right when he points out that Joyce just punched a huge hole in her house. Jonathan wants to go to NYU, and a single mom could always use some extra cash. He's a total jerk for caring about the money more than the kid, but after Joyce runs him off her property, why not care about both? You can care about your kid and money and start legal proceedings against a company that obviously is connected to the large conspiracy at hand, and it might even trip them up, reveal new information, or force them to retreat a little into the shadows. At the very least, it would be a great way to generate some fresh interest in the state of Will's body and the potential to expose the fraud. So, okay, we're back in the forest, and Jonathan is running around yelling for Nancy. Nancy is in the same place, but the upside down version, and apparently the veil between dimensions is thin here, because they can still hear each other's voices. That helps Jonathan zero in on the appropriate tree and discover the world hole. When Nancy's hand suddenly thrusts out toward him, he wastes no time grabbing on and dragging her back into this reality, narrowly saving her from a fate worse than Barb. They head back to her place to recuperate, but the timing is bad, and Steve happens to see Jonathan physically comforting Nancy through the window when he swings by to check on her. Now who's the voyeur, huh, Steve? Frankly, it feels like you're getting totally scooped by Jonathan at the moment. Nancy even asks him to sleep over for some peace of mind, and when he tries to crash on the floor, she invites him to bed instead. It's not exactly a meet cute, since they just tangled with a monster, but Steve doesn't know that, so he's understandably bummed out. At Joyce's house, she and Hopper compare clues and figure out a little more of what we already know, that he's been tracking 11 this whole time, thinking she has Will. He quickly connects the dots with research he did at the library and becomes convinced that 11 is actually a girl named Jane who went missing as a baby years ago. The pair head out to find and question Jane's mom about her disappearance. At around the same time, that nice murderer lady from social services shows up at Mr. Clark's house. Eligibility, this time posing as a fellow teacher representing a nationwide AV club and looking for students to recruit. It's an obvious ploy to get the boys' names and addresses out of him, and it works like a charm. But that's okay. The good guys are working overtime too. In between holding hands and yearning glances, Jonathan and Nancy decide to go back to the woods and face the Demogorgon again. But this time they know a little more. They've established that it hunts alone at night in a specific region and seems to be immediately attracted to fresh blood. They plan to use these elements to concoct some kind of trap or attack, still hoping to find Barb alive somehow in the Upside Down and rescue her. Oh, and Will too, I guess, if they have the time. Mainly Barb though, because Nancy still feels really guilty about going to have sex and leaving her to get eaten, maybe. As for Dustin and Mike, the only two members of our D&D party still in proximity, they get into a brief argument that quickly convinces Mike he owes Lucas an apology. They go over to his house to do the deed and recombine forces to track down Eleven, who got majorly wigged out after their fight and wandered into the woods to be alone and yell at a lake. The problem is, Lucas still considers Elle a traitor and an outsider, not part of the core group. This pisses Mike off again, both because he's crushing on her and because it's pretty dumb to go fight monsters from another dimension and not take your superpowered friend. Lucas refuses to join back up and instead goes off to find Will all on his own. Crazy brave. Foolish, but brave. Also, all alone and being brave, Eleven hits up the grocery store to score more Eggo waffles, which require using her powers since she doesn't have any money. This attracts the attention of the police, and then a bunch of bystanders, which in turn tips off Mike and Dustin that something is going down. Hopefully that's going to lead to a quick reunion with Eleven, because the boys could really use her help about now, and she could probably use a friend. It's bad enough for their survival odds that they immediately fell to bickering and disbanded. Now having the entire police force tracking Elle is a lot more dangerous than when it was just Hopper, the one cop who knows what's actually going on and won't freak out and potentially shoot her on sight when she starts to do witchcraft. Now obviously tensions are running high, and for good reasons, but Rule 1 of surviving a crisis situation is to stay calm and avoid making decisions based on emotional impulse. For example, Jonathan and Nancy run back home the second he pulls her free. It makes sense, but there's a monster behind you. You're scared. I get it. But within a few paces, it should become pretty noticeable that you're not being chased. Calm down, turn around, observe that the portal is sealed at the moment. After all, Nancy just barely squeezed through it just a second ago, and consider how you might turn that into your advantage. Hey, the monster you came here to hunt is inside there right now. For all you know, burning this tree down will kill it. It turns out that wouldn't, but my point is that's the kind of thing that should at least be occurring to them, and probably would if they paused and took a few deep calming breaths. Burning the tree down would eliminate that portal, which would also prevent more demigorgons from coming through, so maybe do that. Of course, that would trap Barb on the other side, but I'm still considering her dead unless explicitly shown otherwise. Sorry, Barb, we gotta cut and run. The whole town's at stake. And a quick note to Mr. Clark, the AV guy. Dude, don't give out personal information about students without their and/or parental consent. Just don't do it. At least ask this woman for credentials and confirm them with a call before you go and doxing some of your favorite kids to a stone-cold assassin. Hopper and Joyce do track down Jane's mom, but it turns out she's been totally unresponsive for years now thanks to her participation in MK Ultra, the early phases of which involved pumping test subjects full of ungodly amounts of LSD and shoving them into the sensory deprivation bath to see if it, I don't know, gave them psychic powers? How the f did that program get funded by the US government? What was the pitch for that? Anyway, the most important bit is that the poor woman had no idea she was pregnant at the time she volunteered for the program. And as a result, Eleven came out all 11-y, as we've seen. The government covered it all up by somehow rendering the mom mute and fabricating evidence of a miscarriage. Oh, and then way late in this season, someone finally does what they should have done immediately. Screw all the Home Alone crap. Jonathan and Nancy hit the army surplus store and pick up a rock hammer, some gas and kerosene, ammo, 9-inch nails, the nail kind, not the band, and a damn bear trap. Let's f***ing go. But let's not go to the latest movie playing at the Hawk, All the Right Moves, starring Nancy the Wheeler. Ha, teens can be so cruel. There aren't enough clues to immediately guess who did it, but doing it right after Nancy bought a bunch of killing tools was bad timing on their part. Oh wait, no, it's Steve. Never mind. Bow! Nance cracked the case quick, specifically by walking around the corner of the building. It's either amazing detective work or Steve really sucks at this. Actually, Steve just sucks generally, so Nancy rightly decides to pop him one. He clearly thinks she cheated on him with Jonathan and reacts badly when the man himself joins the scene. Steve shoves John and calls him queer, which we know he means as an insult because it's 1983. Jonathan throws a punch, Steve tackles him, it's on. Fight, 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 fight. Sorry, I just totally went back to high school for a minute there. Moving on. The cops break up the fight before it can turn into a manslaughter, but as usual, Jonathan takes all the blame and Steve and his entourage of mean girls and pretty boys get away without any consequences. Joyce gets the call that her son is down at the station in handcuffs with Nancy, and it feels like at this point they're kind of a couple, but kind of not, but definitely headed in that direction. Meanwhile, Dustin and Mike are headed in the direction of the laboratory, while 11 chows down on frozen waffles like a waffle queen and ponders her next move. Then those two bullies from Hawkins Middle cut them off, but this time one of them is wielding a knife, which is a definite step up in threat level for those guys. Turns out the kid they made pee his pants is still pissed about it and chases them all the way to the quarry, where he holds Dustin at knife point and threatens to cut his damn teeth out if Mike don't intentionally wet himself right now. Dude, just do it. It's actually super freeing. Why do you think we don't show my bottom half in these videos? Oh, by wet yourself, he means Mike has to jump off the same quarry cliff Will's fake body fell from. That's also messed up. Damn, I should have just admitted that stuff about wetting my pants. Mike makes the leap to save his friend, but before he can hit the water, he's suddenly levitated back up to safety. Cue 11, busting back into action like the Millennium Falcon or Gandalf at Helm's Deep. She walks up all badass and snaps the main bully's knife arm with a thought, sending both of them running and, I'm guessing, wetting their pants yet again. Briefly overwhelmed by the massive release of psychic energy, 11 flashes back to the memory of how she escaped the lab in the first place. During the final experiment, she also overloaded herself and sent out a shockwave powerful enough to shatter the bath and even the wall of the building. As she explains to Mike in the present, that giant energy burst is what opened the portal to the Upside Down in the first place, releasing the Demigorgon. She feels personally responsible, but Mike and Dustin immediately forgive her, because when somebody saves your life and breaks someone else's arm right in front of you a second later, you'd be wise not to hold a grudge against that kind of person. Let that shit go, man. There's no good outcome for you down that road. The kids crouch and group hug in the universal sign for human friendship, then return home to regroup. That's when they get spotted by an agent from the lab who sends some white vans to intercept them, which is rarely a good thing unless there's pictures of ice cream on the side. Fortunately for them, Lucas has already made his way all the way to the laboratory's perimeter fence and spots the fleet of vans with his trusty binoculars. I honestly did not think those would end up being useful. You win this round, Lucas. Of course, now he's got to bike back into town fast enough to get within walkie-talkie range and warn the party before the men in the vans get to Mike's house. The story's really getting moving now, and I don't want to pump the brakes on the adrenaline factor, but I do have one more survival tip, okay? This time, it's for the bad guys. And it's a big one. Don't. Just don't, okay? If your goal is to spy on the Russians, find a way to do it with satellites or parabolic microphones instead. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because inventing psychic people, like literally experimenting on the human brain until you unlock our inherent telepathic potential, but only inside a traumatized, terrified child, is not practical, okay? It's just not. You barely talk to her, guys. Just because you told her that this one dude with gray hair is her papa, that doesn't mean you can keep kicking a nuclear bomb you built and act all surprised when that sucker goes off and blows your house down. On the other hand, If their goal was to learn more about the Upside Down, which also seems to be part of the agenda, there has to be a better way to expend a ton of energy and open a portal than using a human battery. Again, there are way more stable, predictable ways to do what they're trying to do with the technology instead of people. Machines don't run away. Tools don't befriend a bunch of other kids and fight back at you. You're supposed to be scientists, and you're sending guys in with ropes around their waist to get crunched up. Get it f***ing together. Lucas gets through to the gang just in the nick of time, naturally, and they finally drop all pretense and just ditch on their bikes right in front of Mike's mom. She seems pretty confused, although I'd argue they should have done this earlier. They narrowly miss the convoy and are fully spotted by Papa and his goons, so the chase is on. It's the classic battle of van versus bike. On the one hand, vans crush bikes like nothing, but on the other hand, bikes can take shortcuts across lawns and curbs. If you're on Team Bike, it also helps that 11 can do this. Oh, boom! Sadly, that wasn't the van Papa was in, but the good guys get away and huddle up, Lucas included. All previous static is forgiven, and he apologizes to Elle for not trusting her before. The team's back together, baby. You can tell from the classic handshake shot. Back at the Hawkins police station, Hopper finds out Jonathan has a big box of army surplus weaponry in his car and quite sensibly demands an explanation. He and Nancy spill everything they know about the Demigorgon and show Joyce and Hopper Jonathan's photo of one. Helpfully, Troy the bully with the broken arm is there with his mom filing a police report right that minute about Eleven's decisive victory at the quarry. He describes her as having a shaved head and telekinesis. And Hopper has finally seen enough weird shit to believe him on both counts. He also learns that she's part of a little 4-kid team and takes off to pursue the new lead in a squad car, with Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy going along for the ride. A little while later, the queen bee of government agents drops in on Mike's mom and dad with the whole laboratory gang, Papa included. This time she's posing as state police, which might be what she actually is, but she's so deep undercover by now that it's not totally clear on that. They toss the basement and find the evidence of Eleven's stay there, but the parents insist that they would have noticed something like that. When things get heated, Papa steps in, and we get the sense that he's either a horse whisperer or maybe has some supernatural persuasive power of his own, because Mom immediately stops yelling and starts cooperating. Across town, Steve, all beat to crap, realizes what a jerk he's been again and blows up at his douchey friends, driving what seems like it'll finally be a permanent wedge between them. He regrets the fight, admires Nancy's kindness, and desperately wants to apologize again. He's turning good, and maybe this time it'll stick. He even goes back to the Hawk to clean up his own bad sign, which is a good sign. Once again, thanks to the miracle of walkie-talkie technology, the group that includes Nancy is able to make contact with the group that includes Mike. Hopper convinces the two teams to join forces, and even takes care of a couple more bad guys before picking the kids up from a broken bus where they've been all holed up. Then they all go over to Joyce's house, and at long last, at least 80% of the main cast are gathered together in the same place, and ready to square off against whatever evil can throw at them. Or are they? Because they just established very empathetically that the clock is running down. But at the same time, there's still a ton of information that has to be exchanged before all the heroes are up to speed. The state police and lab people are out there gathering their forces and closing in. Yet Mike is stuck using a metaphor about a tightrope walker and Bug to try and teach his 1980s mom about the concept of a multiverse. Honestly, Joyce does pretty well with it, but this is exactly why I begged you all to reach out right at the start of all this ruckus, from some kind of mutual aid network with clear channels of communication, and keep all the stakeholders in the loop about everything. Knowledge is power, like how I just used my knowledge of business jargon to make myself sound slightly more insightful than I really am. All I'm really saying is that this show really worked hard to keep the groups all split up until the very end, but that's over now. We're closing in on the climax, and there's nowhere the monster from A Quiet Place, the Demigorgon, can hide. But like, come on people, you had walkie-talkies this whole time and openly talked about how useful it would be to contact anyone you need to. whenever you need to. Buy a big box of them and hand them out. Joyce went to the store 8 times to buy Christmas lights to communicate. How hard is it to toss some walkie-talkies into the cart? Cell phones would solve tons of old horror movies before they even started. But in the case of Stranger Things, I really think a 4-pack of walkie-talkies or even some kind of smoke signal system would have been enough to save the day. Once all the good guys are done having a big meeting where they take turns recapping pretty much everything that's happened so far to each other, hey, that's my job. It's time to proceed with the plot. First, Eleven tries reaching out with her mind, but can't get a whiff of Will or Barb in the Upside Down. What she needs is a power boost, and to get that, she needs to take a bath. Honestly, after all she's been through, she just needs a bath anyway. Dustin calls Mr. Clark and basically guilt trips him into explaining how to make a sensory deprivation tank from scratch in the middle of the night, which it turns out involves making a ton of salt water. Hopper and Jonathan nab the salt, Mike and Nancy fetch the water, 11 takes the plunge. Okay, this is good, guys. They've got the little psychic girl floating in a kiddie pool of warm salt water. That means they're really close to killing the monster and stopping evil. I know those concepts don't sound very connected, but it all comes together when 11 draws on all of her power to mentally travel to the Upside Down and locate Will and Barb. Remember Barb? She's dead. Told ya, long dead. Like bugs crawling out of her mouth dead. Sorry, I just find it funny how much Barb comes up all throughout the season considering she totally died 3 minutes after being introduced. Hey, it's not too late for Will though. 11 finds him alive but unconscious, hiding in a wooden fort lost in a void, just before she exhausts her connection and jumps back to reality. Jonathan recognizes the fort from 11's vision, as one Will hangs out in our world. So, now understanding basically how the Upside Down works, Joyce and Hopper peel out and tear ass to the normal Hawkins version of the same fort. Being responsible adults, Hopper and Joyce insist all the teens and kids stay behind at the school. Being teens, Jonathan and Nancy decide to steal back their box of weaponry and go fight the Demigorgon anyway, which is honestly good because Hopper and Joyce are completely surrounded by bad guys as soon as they arrive on scene and quickly taken into custody. So now someone's got to save Will and kill the Demigorgon and rescue Joyce and Hopper too. Frankly, it's exhausting. Ask 11 if you don't believe me. Homegirl's tired. As am I, and I don't really want to slow down right before the climax, so I'll keep my survival advice clear and brief. Joyce, you're a grief-stricken mother grappling with the paranormal who has no training for this, so you get a pass. Hopper, you've been a cop for over a decade and tangled with these guys all season. What made you think they wouldn't have people with guns waiting for you? Did it even occur to you to try stealth? Or are you just overconfident from that time you drove right up to the gate and it somehow worked? Lastly, Barb. The whole Barb situation. All I'll say is that if you're at a party you didn't even want to be at and your friend ditches you and says you can go home, go home. If you end up just chilling at the end of a diving board all alone in silence, definitely go home. You're done here, and it's okay to let Nancy make her own mistakes. Remember, kids, if the vibe ain't right, listen to that instinct. Oh, and did I mention, over under in the Upside Down, there's a major downside. Will's fort is being actively attacked by a Demigorgon. Time is running out. It would be a super bad time to, say, for example, get handcuffed to a chair by a bunch of goons. Joyce and Hopper get interrogated in an undisclosed location, but neither one of them is going to crack anytime soon. Well, Hopper tells them everything he knows actually, but more to rub it in their faces how much he figured out, and he doesn't spill anything that would actually help the bad guys. In fact, Hopper is so good at getting tortured and interrogated, he somehow ends up talking Papa into a deal. Since they all want Will and 11 back, and they all want the breach sealed, the bad guys will let Joyce and Hopper go finish their quest if they promise not to reveal anything about the many crimes and scandals to the public. They were probably going to kill them after interrogating them anyway, so from the government's perspective, may as well let these foolhardy dreamers die trying before sending in a squad with machine guns to mop up afterward. The duo suit up and go once more into the breach to search the Upside Down for Will. But there's another Demigorgon stalking Hawkins that still needs to be dealt with. Jonathan and Nancy decide to combine both real weaponry and Home Alone-style traps to kill the beast. They use some of their own blood as bait and strings of light as proximity detectors, since the Demigorgon's presence seems to overload electrical stuff. While they wait for the inevitable battle, there's a sudden knock at the door, and it's Steve. And he's here to apologize. Again, but we do get the impression he's a full good guy now, even if Nancy ends up pointing a gun at him to try and get him to leave before the monster arrives. Too late, the Demigorgon chases them into the bedroom but then retreats, leaving them to wonder where it lurks in the silent house. Steve makes a run for his car first, but when the lights start going nuts again and growls and gunshots fill the air, he realizes he's got to Millennium Falcon the situation. The creature has Jonathan pinned and seems nigh impervious to Nancy's bullets. Then, like a badass, Steve comes in with a bat full of nails and beats the thing all the way into the trap they set up. Lighting a carpet soaked with kerosene, Jonathan sets the beast aflame. But once the fire's out, all that's left is a hole chewed in the floor, leading to the impression that the Demigorgon is battered, but not down for the count just yet. The government agents are busy tying up loose ends, which means assaulting the kids at the school and trying to get to 11, although not before Mike finally screws up the courage to ask her to dance. Then he just kisses her, which is really skipping a lot of the middle part of the dating process. But hey, we're near the end here. We have to get some shit done quickly. Case in point, 11 finally takes it all the way and kills a bunch of agents with her mind. But doing so makes her pass out, and there are plenty more agents from where those came from. They restrain the boys while Papa tries to convince 11 to obey his orders like she used to. But she's not like other girls. But as fate would have it, that's right when the buckets of blood that were just spilled attract a Demigorgon, who wastes no time serving Papa his comeuppance. Nice! Finally! Hated that guy. Although since he's the one who just got eaten, I will offer him a posthumous survival tip. People love their kids, dude. Obviously not everyone, but it's a general rule, especially in movies, that a parent would sacrifice or do anything if their kid's life were on the line. You had a deal, the deal worked. Both sides could have come out of this a win-win, but you just had to be 100% sure every loose end was neatly tied, so you went after their pesky kids. Including the one you know is a powerful telepath because you made her one personally. Dumb! Guy deserved to bleed from the eyes, quite frankly. Back in the land down under, Joyce and Hopper track some creepy Demigorgon's purring sounds all the way to the site of Will's fort, where the creature has cocooned him in some slime to eat later. Mom pulls his unconscious body free from the wall, briefly safe from the government agents who are busy getting their asses handed to them by the monster. The boys get 11 into a classroom and wake her up, only to be cornered by their ancient and ultimate Dungeons & Dragons foe. In the clearest shot of the whole season, the Demigorgon roars and flexes in all his glory. Lucas fires his wrist rocket, but seriously, who expected that to work? As usual, 11 has to save the day when things really get real. But this time, it's going to take so much out of her that she doesn't think she'll survive. She pins the Demigorgon to the wall and says goodbye to her new friends, ready to sacrifice herself for all three of them. Or just Mike, I guess. Sorry, Lucas and Dustin, you didn't make the cut. 11 rips the Demigorgon into pieces that shower down around her as it screams its final death screech. But once the ashes have settled, she's gone as well. Will's right on the edge too, and even though Hopper stopped the second Demigorgon, they're still struggling to get him to breathe. The crisis triggers memories of watching his daughter die of cancer, and he's almost overcome. But after enough CPR, Will finally gasps and wakes up. All of the bad guys get eaten or retreat, all of the good folks get to safety, and Will wakes up in a hospital with Joyce and Jonathan standing over him. His pals rush in for a friends reunion and tell Will all about the cool X-Men girl they met while he was gone. A month later, the guys are back to their normal routine, playing D&D in the basement and fighting a Thessal Hydra, the new big bad of the campaign. They win that battle too. Jonathan definitely seems even closer to Nancy and is spending tons of time with his little brother, grateful to have him back. But twist reveals that she's still with Steve. So I guess he earned enough good boy points, and Jonathan is just a really close friend. We'll see where that goes. Mike's romantic interest is still gone though, and in the background, Hawkins National Laboratory still looms large, casting a shadow of mystery and danger over the town. Hopper holds a lonely vigil for Eleven, who he now considers like a daughter, and attempts to trap her with waffles in a box. You know, dad stuff. Oh, and Will throws up a slug and seems to be flickering back and forth between our world and the Upside Down. Who knows what stranger things might yet crawl out of the darkness. I mean, I do. The show's been out for a long time, but now you do too, and I hope it was a pretty damn fun ride. There's plenty more to come for this show, but at least the current crisis is resolved. Stranger Things Season 1, holy f***ing shit, that show is dope. I love it. I'm so glad we got to cover it here on the channel. Let me know down in the comments if you guys would have done anything differently. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out that How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. I'm the guy. I'll see you in the next video, and have a damn good day.